What's happening, everybody? Welcome back to JG's Lounge. I'm your host, Jukebox, and I haven't been on here in a few days. I don't think it's been a few minutes, but it's always good to go live. And I've had this show pretty much prepped and ready for about a week and a half now, and with schedules between everybody, it's been kind of so yeah, but we're here for another episode of Singed Eye Sockets tonight, everybody. So thanks for all of you who are gonna tune in or gonna listen. We appreciate you guys. We're gonna continue doing content for all of you because we know that you guys like it. We see the numbers and it feels great. Evolution, man, how the hell are you?
Hey, man, I'm doing real good. It's been a great day. Looking forward to this. I mean, we do it different times of the day, but I'm ready to go. I've loved the Sins Eye Socket episodes that we do, and they're very interesting. And I just really like getting into it and try to figure out what's going on.
Right. Yeah. The last sentence we did, we had a Corey Castle with us. We did a Scorched episode where we kind of discussed a serial killer. A little bit, I wouldn't say it's more intense, but it's more like on a personal level. It's just a singular person rather than where we tackle cases, which I do want to start throwing those in more often. I do like it. I think it turned out great. It was a bit morbid, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Just like all these are a lot of fun. I do a lot more research. And it feels good. It's kind of get me back into my older days where I actually would read stuff. A comedy show is not nearly as, it's so much more brainless than this show is. And I feel like if I came into this with the same mindset as I did with Stardom, it'd probably not be as interesting of a show because I'd be more ums and ahs and not knowing what I'm talking about.
Right.
So yeah, that's where we're going. We have a lot of guests lined up over the next probably month or two that we're going to get on multiple shows. I kind of went over it with Evolution before. I do want to give a shout out to Kyle Ament. He's been sending us actors, actresses, film directors that I've been getting in contact with, and I'm like, man, all right, cool. I appreciate you, man, but let's hit the brakes for a second. Let me reach out to this 24 people that you just sent me, and we're gonna make this happen. So yeah, we're looking forward to that. I do have one of his buddies, Marcus McIntosh, will be on Sunday morning with Kyle Ament, which Evolution, you're welcome to join in as well.
All right.
But yeah, that's what we're doing. Tomorrow morning, we might even do a show. I'm not sure yet because this is a late night show, so we'll see. It really just depends on if I have the ability to wake up. And so looking forward to that's an ASMR podcast. I also got set up and ready. That one's a lot of fun. Evolution knows, man. We just crack up. It's the most ridiculous show. It's a lot of fun. And it's nice to laugh sometimes for no reason.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It gets those good vibes going. You know what I mean?
Right. All right, man. I've been yapping for the intro, and I do it because I love kind of smoothing our way into the episode. So today we have the Keddie Cabin murders, or also known as the Cabin 28 murders. Are you familiar with this?
I am not.
Good. That's good. All right. That's the end of the show, everybody. Have a good day. Until next time. All right. So this is it's 1981 is when this murder happens. But a real quick rundown about the family. This is Glenna Susan Sharp, also known as Sue Sharp. She's the mother. You got 15-year-old son John. That's the one on the left. The picture is a little bit older than their age. This is their age as when they passed, when all of this went down with the murder. So you got 15-year-old son John up at the top left. You've got the oldest daughter, which is a 14-year-old Sheila, 12-year-old Tina in the back right. You got 10-year-old Rick, and then you also have Greg, which she's holding. So those are older pictures, but this is the family that we're going to talk about. So Sue Sharp, in 1979, decides to move from North Carolina to California because she's leaving her husband James Sharp, who was physically abusive, and just wasn't a great relationship. He was in the military. They it was When he was home, it just wasn't great, and she realized it wasn't the best fit for them. So she had a brother named Don Thomas, who lived in Northern California, and he decided to let them come stay with him. He had a trailer in Quincy, California. It's in Northern California. It's in uh, Plumas County, California. Real pretty, like small, remote county up in the mountains. I mean, you're talking about tourism, camping out in the woods, somewhere you see hikers, and it's not really the place that you would see, a lot of murders happening. And
Mm.
so she moves her family out there. It's her and her 5 kids, and she gets a job at a lodge in Quincy, which is a small town. There, the population is about 1,200. It's a real small town.
Hmm.
She's a part-time job at this lodge. She's doing a typing class in town so that she could get stipends to kind of help support her family on
Hmm.
top of some military funds from the Navy from her ex-husband James, so she was getting like 250 a month from him. So she was struggling, single mom, but she's doing the best for her kids. And after a while, she ends up having enough money to kind of get her own place. So she moves her family to the small town of Keddie, California. The population was like 100 people at most. It's very
Mm.
small. There's not a lot going on in Keddie. This is actually sort of a map of Keddie. Keddie was built for mining and a coal town. There's a train track down on the right side there that runs right by Keddie, and this whole area is basically like a little, like almost campsite full of cabins. And when it was first built, they were real fancy cabins, and a lot of it was train conductors or miners that would stay in them while they were there in town. Eventually, it became uh, a more low income housing, and that's why she moved her family here. And they were happy. It was a small little cabin town, and it was a Keddie resort. I mean, real pretty looking town there.
Mm.
Uh, but actually, that's not it. I was just joking. This is actually uh, the Keddie Resort. Real fancy looking,
Oh
run
yeah,
down, middle of the woods
that's
community.
five star right there.
Yeah, real 5-star, low income housing, and the cabins don't look a whole lot better. This is actually cabin number 28 that she moved into right here.
Mm.
Real small, dingy little cabin that no longer exists. Actually, the community decided to tear the cabin down because they were getting too much, negative tourism and just people coming after the murders. This whole community kind of went downhill. There are still some people that live in the community, but for the most part, it's vacant.
Mm.
And I think the last census said something like the population was 69. I mean, it's practically nothing.
Wow.
So she's struggling, but the kids are happy. They're in this small little community. They have friends in the neighborhood that they can play with. And things are going good for her. Like the family's not unhappy, So they're about 7 miles away from Quincy, where they originally moved, and
Hmm.
that's where she's got her part-time job. And she's doing the best she can for her family. And it's April 11th of 1981 is the day where all of this kind of goes down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a timeline of the day,
Hmm.
and then I'm going to kind of break down the murder and then some of the ideas of who the suspects could be.
Okay.
So around 11:30, Sue Sharp, with her daughter Sheila and the oldest son, not the middle-aged son Rick, drive to Quincy to pick up their son John, the oldest, from baseball practice, and they come home with him and his buddy Dana. So at this time, her oldest son John is 15, and his friend Dana lives in Quincy, and they're like best buddies. They're known for kind of um, um, hitchhiking back and
Mhm.
forth between Keddie and Quincy, and they've actually kind of have a little bit of a history of being kind of trouble kids, like involved in drugs and stuff like that. Which during the investigation, there's no proof in the house of any narcotics or any sort of drug paraphernalia. So this is all sort of a hearsay based on just some of the people that they've investigated during this whole thing.
Mhm.
So she brings them home, and they're all hanging out. It's Saturday. This is a Saturday. And then Dana and him at some point later in the day decide to hitchhike back to Quincy to go to a party. Are you kind of on board at the moment?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Later that day, her daughter Sheila and Tina decide to go to the next door neighbors in cabin 27, the Siebold family, and Tina and Sheila are hanging out, and Sheila decides that she's going to have a sleepover at the Siebold's house, but she sends Tina home, which is the younger sister, around 9:30 that night. At this point, all we know is that Tina goes home. The boys, the oldest one, John, and his friend Dana are gone. They're back in Quincy. It's some party, is what we're told. And
Mhm.
there's apparently drug activity at this party. The next morning, the youngest sons, sorry, the Rick and Greg, the youngest boys, are having a sleepover in the back room of the cabin 28
Mhm.
with their buddy Justin Smart, who lives in cabin 29, I believe. There's a lot of different cabin numbers.
All right.
Anyways, it's one of the neighbors. It's one of the neighbors' cabins. Justin Smart's staying the night with them, so they're in the back room hanging out, and Sheila's next door. So that's all we know as far as what the day's kind of plan was.
Mhm.
At between 7 and 8 in the morning, Sheila wakes up to go back to her cabin, and when she opens her front door, the first thing she sees is her oldest brother John, dead and covered in blood on the floor,
Wow.
right inside the living room. And she screams, obviously, which I don't understand why you wouldn't. She
Mhm.
didn't even notice Dana and Sue, who were also murdered in the house in the same room.
Wow.
Let's see. I took up a picture of the kind of layout of the living room. It's not the best image, but so when you walk in the front door, this is kind of what you see. That's obviously not the prettiest cabin.
Mhm.
So her brother John is towards the bottom. This is after the crime, so you don't really see any bodies because they're gone.
Mhm.
Dana was resting his head on this like pillow cushion in like the middle of the floor,
Mhm.
and then his mom Sue was at the foot of the bed on the ground on her side. She was naked from the waist down. Her panties and a bandana were stuffed into her mouth, and
Mm.
she was tied up, and she had her throat slit. So Sheila, after she sees her brother, she runs back to the Siebold's family, and they immediately contact the authorities, and she sends her oldest son Jamie back to the cabin to check because Sheila was frantic
Mhm.
and she didn't want um obviously her going back. So Jamie comes over, he opens the door all the way, he sees John, Dana, his friend, and Sue Sharp on the floor in front of the sofa. When the cops, or when he walks through, he goes back to the back, and he sees that the the boys are still there, sound asleep.
Hmm.
All three of them. And so instead of waking them up, he decides to go out which this was really smart of him. I do want to give him props for this one. He goes out and he goes around to the boys' room's window, and he helps them out the window. That way they don't see what's going on in the other room, which I think was really smart on his end.
I agree.
Really smart kid. The cops show up, and at this point, nobody even acknowledged that Tina was missing, the younger daughter, which is crazy because you think that would have been something that everybody was like, "Where's Tina?" But Sheila's, I can understand in a sense because Sheila's probably frantic. She's not even thinking because of what she witnessed, right? And then Jamie went and helped. So they didn't even realize that Tina was missing at this point. All they knew was they had a crime scene. Wikipedia says, well, first off, what are you kind of caught up? Do you have any questions so far?
No, I'm following along pretty good.
Good. Let's see here. Sorry, bear with me a second here.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm moving too fast for myself. I'm trying to get, okay, let's see here. Okay. All it says, when the police arrived, they found Sue, John, and Dana in the house living room. All three had been bound with medical tape and electrical tape. Tina was absent from the home, while the three younger children were found unharmed in the back room. Sheila rushed back to the Seabolts, which I already went over that. The murders of Sue, John, and Dana were especially vicious. 2 bloodied knives and 1 hammer were found at the scene. Blood splatter evidence from inside the house indicated that the murders had all taken place in the living room. Sue was discovered lying on her side near the living room sofa, nude from the waist down, gagged with a blue banana in her underwear, which had been secured with tape. She'd been stabbed in the chest, and her throat was stabbed horizontally, passing through her larynx and nicking her spine. Very brutal. That's very brutal. Somebody had to really try. Like somebody had it out for her. I mean, that's a very vicious way to die.
No kidding.
And they also found the butt imprint of a Daisy 880 Powerline BB pellet rifle. John's throat was slashed. Dana had multiple head injuries and had been manually strangled to death. So John and Sue were the only 2 who actually had their throats cut.
Wow.
And the investigators even said that this took time. It wasn't like a rushed thing because of how much blood there was and because of like the condition of the bodies. Whoever did this took their time. The weird part is that nobody heard anything. We're talking about these very tiny cabins. I showed you the picture of cabin 28. They're very small walls, not very, insulated. And nobody, there was one family that said around 1:15 that they heard some muffled noises, but they didn't think anything of it.
Wow.
But other than that, nobody heard anything. So that's where we're at right now. What you got?
Her ex is military, right?
Yes.
I'm thinking he found her, tracked her somehow, and
he did show up at one point after they moved, and that was the only time they ever saw him again.
I'm thinking it's not the last time that Sue and John saw him. I'm thinking he came back with a rage of vengeance that, and then because the 2 of them were the oldest, they probably were trying to, stand up against him or whatever. But because he had that type of training, he probably could have just snuck in there and nobody would have knew anything. You know what I mean?
Right.
And by the time they figured it out, it was too late. But what really has me puzzled, well, not puzzled, but I'll say puzzled, is how she was nude from the waist down and kind of gagged. It's almost like one of those passionate deals where
somebody
who's snapped like an ex would probably go that
And
route.
that is one thing that the investigator said is that this is based on the condition of the bodies of John and Sue specifically. It almost seemed like whoever it was had vengeance. Like it was like a vengeance kind of murder.
Yeah, yeah.
Now,
I agree with that. Go ahead.
yeah. At this point, they're starting to ask around to the neighbors, and one of the kids that stayed the night there, Justin Smart, his parents, Marilyn Smart, and stepdad James Smart, or no, it is his dad. Sorry. They start looking into them, and they question them about if there was anything weird. And Martin Smart mentions that one of his hammers had gone missing recently, which they didn't mention anything about the hammer. So they thought that was kind of suspicious at first.
No kidding.
So Martin, let me tell you a little bit about Martin Sharp here.
Okay.
So let's see here. This is good old Martin Sharp. He is a retired vet going to he's going to PTSD classes. He has anger issues. He works at the so Keddie Resort is a bunch of cabins, and at one point it was a very prominent little community. They had a bar and grill that still was active at this time, and he was a cook at the bar until the day of this incident, which apparently he gets terminated from his job. But he's going to therapy for his anger issues. And even Marilyn was discussing that she was leaving him. When they were doing the investigation, they found out that she was in the process of leaving him. But also at this time, while he was going to some of his classes, he meets this guy, Bo. I don't know Bo's last name. That's the interesting thing. But Bo and him knew each other for a few weeks, and at this point during the murders, he is living on their couch in their home with Martin and Marilyn.
Wow.
And they're like inseparable. All the neighbors talk about how for a few weeks he was living with them, and they're inseparable together. Bo does have some crime affiliation. He was in prison at one point, connected to some mafia back in Vegas. And I think this might play a factor into it. And on top of this, the county sheriff that is over this investigation is friends with Martin. So I think that could play a little bit into this because they investigate these two together. And I want to get into, which is weird because you don't, if you have suspects, you don't investigate these guys together. That's not something you're going to do. So they have their suspicions of Martin. And what happened is Martin discusses when they come in that night, Martin and Bo and his wife Marilyn go to the bar in their little community. They're having drinks. About 9:30, they leave to go back to their house. Marilyn stays home. Martin and Bo go back to the bar and continue to drink. And she says that Marilyn said that she wouldn't be surprised if it was Martin because of his anger issues. But that's where we're at so far. But we also discussed that John and his buddy Dana were kind of, troublemakers in Quincy. That night they were going to a party in Quincy where there was a few witnesses that said there were drugs at the party. And I'm thinking, what if maybe they got a ride back from somebody who they owed money to, or they stole some drugs and somebody followed them back home? They could have potentially done it. But this is on the bottom right. That's Dana. That's the 17-year-old. And John's the one on the top.
Okay. Did they ever find a little girl?
No, we'll get to that.
Okay.
No. So again, the first half of the day, they didn't even realize that she was missing. So I think that's pretty crappy on the side of of the cops too.
No kidding.
To miss that. And honestly, I think that could have been a very crucial time to find her, with your drug sniffing dogs, scouring the neighborhoods, community, the woods. After about 3 months, the case pretty much goes cold as far as looking for Tina.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. What do you got so far? I mean, what are you thinking?
Well, now that you mentioned Martin and Bo, and him having anger issues and PTSD, right?
Right.
Definitely adds a new angle to the the story, the storyline for sure. I would say when they went back to the bar to drink, right? And they separated from everyone else. To me, it's like an alibi, right?
Yes. That's what I'm thinking.
And because they were friends, and the what's the other guy? He's like a
Bo.
Yeah, he was like an officer or something.
No, he was an inmate. He did time for some gang affiliations in Vegas, and he met Martin a few years back at some of the meetings that he was going to for whatever the anger issues.
And then Martin,
that's how they met, and they became friends.
But Martin, he was
he retired Navy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So right. they could have put together a masterpiece of a slaughterhouse-ish episode.
Right. And they talk about, so Martin for some reason was not fond of the oldest son, John. Apparently he didn't like him. Marilyn talks about how he wasn't fond of, or how he didn't like him because he was kind of a troublemaker with that Dana kid. And then she also talks about how Bo makes comments about liking Sue. And apparently that night they even asked Sue if she wanted to go out and have some drinks with them, and she turned him down. So if you got two guys that potentially have hothead issues, one doesn't like the son, one's pissed at the mom because she turns him down. Possibly they've been drinking all night. Martin apparently he didn't tell the cops this, but from the investigation they found out that he was either fired that day or the day prior, within a few days from that place that he was getting drunk at. Marilyn's separating from him, so he's already having some. I mean, you got PTSD, you got anger issues. I can see a lot of these things kind of adding up.
No kidding. Wow.
Now, my biggest issue with this so far is because already my immediate suspects are Martin and Bo. Like, those are the first guys I'm going to be looking at, especially because he mentions that his hammer goes missing without even knowing that there was a hammer at the scene.
Yeah, that definitely jumped out when you said it. I'm like, okay, that's why I was thinking it added a new dynamic to the story. However, they all have military backgrounds.
Yes,
Martin, Bo, and her ex.
Yes.
So I'm thinking there might even be a connection there.
Possibly. I mean, I don't really see much more about that, though. I mean, they do talk about the Seabolt family mentions that at around 9 o'clock that night they did see a green van, a dark green van in the neighborhood that was not familiar. Nobody was really familiar with the vehicle. And then one other family had mentioned seeing that same van later that night in the area. So they're kind of looking at that van, trying to figure things out too. So Martin and Bo aren't really suspects right now. When they investigate them, Martin's story is a little different than Marilyn's, because Martin's is, yeah, we went to the bar. Yeah, she went home, went to sleep. Yeah, we went back to the bar. Marilyn's side of the story is that they went home. She was ready to go to sleep. They were getting drunk and belligerent. She says that they change into suits and goes back to the bar. So they dress up and go back to the bar. and she says she remembers them around 2:30 back at the home, burning something in the wood stove, and she said she was still kind of out of it, so she wasn't sure what they were burning. And Martin says that it was just wood. That's all it was. So, I mean, they don't really look into it. They do find out that the hammer that was at the crime scene wasn't his. There were no prints on it that would, say it was his. It is actually found at a pond nearby. Later on, when there's some guy fishing for a wedding ring that they lost, and he finds the hammer. So,
Wow.
and that ends up being his hammer. So, but I don't know that they used it. I don't know if that was just a kind of to throw off the case, like knowing if, with Martin with his military background, maybe he's a kind of clever enough to figure that out. Just as like to throw it, and they talk about how everything's Martin saying is kind of redirected to where it makes him look innocent. Like whatever he's selling his side of the story is more portraying like away from him.
Yes.
And it bugs me because the chief investigator is friends with him. They're friends.
Yeah. Okay, that's the connection I was trying to make up. Earlier. Yeah, that's cover up all day.
Well, and they have so the Department of Justice is usually sent out for this kind of stuff during the investigation, and they don't send out the state of California ends up sending somebody from LA that is not from that. It's like some other subdivision class, and they even bring in a sketch artist that's not even very amateur, and they talk to Justin, the oldest son of Martin, one who was staying the night in the room with the boys. Because Justin, during the investigation, was talking to the cops about how he had a dream that night about being on a boat and witnessing two men killing Sue.
Wow.
And how he remembers trying to comfort Sue and put blankets over her head to kind of help with the blood.
Wow.
And that's the story that he tells the cops. But later on, he goes to a therapist for hypnosis, where he tells her, maybe I wasn't dreaming, and then he says he remembers going to the door because he heard something and cracking the door open and seeing two men, one with his hair slicked back, wearing glasses, and the other man might have had a mustache. Now let me pull up this picture again of the picture of Martin and Bo, because this here's Martin and Bo. All right, this, and I already pulled this picture up once. He's got long slick hair. Martin does. Glasses. He could put glasses on. We don't know if Bo has a mustache at the time of this or not. But I did pull up a sketch of what they came up with.
Okay.
Here it is. This is based on Justin's story. It's not great because he's an amateur sketch artist anyways. But there are some similarities that could point to them, Yeah,
it's a lot of similarities.
So I don't know. I mean, everything's starting to kind of point towards them. Let's see here. What else do I have?
I'm thinking everything should point towards them. I mean, they were the last ones to be seen with Sue and John,
Yeah. But I still think that there is the possibility that John and Dana could have brought somebody back or gotten a ride back from somebody, or been involved in some sort of a drug. That's a small possibility. I mean, I'm definitely thinking it's Martin and Bo, but I could see the play out of John and Dana going to a party, and if they're mischievous children, maybe stealing drugs or not paying or something, and then getting held at gunpoint or something and brought back to the cabin and this all going down. The problem with that theory, though, is the way that the deaths
Hmm.
were a little too intense for just somebody who didn't know them to just go in there and do that.
I think they definitely knew them, especially when there was nobody hearing any noise or the sounds were muffled.
Right.
Um, to me, they didn't break in; they were let in.
Right.
So they knew who it was when they got there,
Mhm.
and then
And
everything went down after that.
what I don't understand though is there was no noise. Like there's no like nobody hears anything. Like how is it playing out the way that it like because the way that they were killed and how gruesome it was, you think there would have been some sort of altercation, something like they had to been bound first so that they couldn't do anything.
Not if drugs were involved. I mean, if they were
Um,
high
if they
on
came back
something,
drunk, or high, maybe they were confused, but like they're getting hit in the head with hammers and getting their throats slit. Dana being strangled. I mean, I don't know. They could have even been brought in already beat up. I don't know.
I mean, it doesn't really take a lot. Uh, when you get hit in the head with a hammer, you're pretty much done, depending on how hard it is. And
Mhm,
same with the slicing of a throat. If it's deep enough, you're not gonna make any noise anyway. You're just gonna be,
mhm.
you know.
Yeah,
So that might be the muffled sound that the person heard. Uh,
right. I
but
and I don't think that there's a lot of relevance to the green van. I mean, anybody could have been passing through or stopping. I mean, I don't know that there could be because it's not Martin's vehicle unless they bought this cheap vehicle specifically for this. But
if the little girl was missing,
uh
then there was relevance for the green van.
right,
That's
and
how.
there was a post for this for a green van being sold around this time too.
Wow.
So he could have gotten it specifically for this.
Hmm.
So another weird angle of this is that some of the investigators that weren't at the higher level think that maybe it was a cover up story that it Martin and Bo were not suspects because Bo could have been an informant for the FBI and got out because he was helping them find some bigger game.
Because he knew
The
the
mafia. He was originally arrested for mafia relations in Las
mhm.
Vegas, and then he was released. But the the way that he was released was suspicious, and the fact that the government wasn't sending the proper people for this murder case. I mean, we're talking about a very small community. It's not. They don't have the very best. They're not used to this. They should have been sending
Yeah.
very good Department of Justice people, and they weren't. They sent amateur sketch artists. They got people that didn't even know that Tina was gone for half the day. And they do. They end up bringing drug dogs in, and sniffing dogs in, and they do track her scent down to several cabins down. There's nothing there saying that anything happened there.
Hmm.
And eventually, the case goes cold for her because there's nothing. There's nothing to come up. You know, However, 3 years later, in 1984, a a metal or guy, there's people that go out in the woods and they bring their metal detectors searching for stuff.
Hmm.
And this guy comes across a part of a human skull. It's about 64 miles away from the Keddie area. And this ends up being Tina. So she did pass away. She was found, her
Wow.
body was found in the woods, some articles of clothing, but she was so gone from nature because it's been so many years that they couldn't
Hmm.
tell how she died. Um, and if anything, it brings a little bit of rest for Sheila and her brothers and sister, knowing that she's been found at least.
Mm-hmm.
But that the case goes cold. Martin and Bo end up dying years later, just free
Mm-hmm.
men. They have no other suspects, and it's just a weird crime. I mean, I don't know, man. There's not a lot of information pointing towards anybody but Martin and Bo. But I think that maybe their connections benefited them.
Oh, absolutely. When you're in a house that far out in the middle of nowhere with not a lot of people, would you say less than 100?
Yeah.
Or around 100? That eventually got less than 100. Small towns like that always creep me out because anything and everything can happen, and they can shut it down.
Right.
You know what I mean? They can cover it up.
Mm-hmm.
I still think that Bo and Martin at least knew her ex. And then when they went back to the bar or whatever, gave him a call and said, "Hey, we know where she is. You've been looking for them. They're here."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think he tore through town, and with his military background, you know, got his sneaking. He snuck up in there, or
Mm-hmm.
and did whatever he did.
Well, and there's also the theory that Martin was also a drug addict, along with the drunk. And what if maybe he was part of like that community's connection with drugs?
Oh, no doubt.
And maybe what if John and Dana were involved in some drug relations in Quincy, and then Martin was maybe one of the higher up guys, and if he already didn't like John, there's just more that could kind of tangle it together to make it more valid for him to be the one that does it.
True. No argument there.
And I really don't see any other suspect. Like, it's got to be somebody that knows him. We know that. And there's really nobody else during the investigation that comes up that could be a possible suspect. And the fact that they got let go scot-free because they couldn't, there wasn't enough evidence to say it was them, whatever. It's disturbing because it just shows sort of like favoritism for one, which in a thing that favoritism should not be involved. If anything, that chief should not have been involved at all. I mean, I don't think he should have been involved in that investigation whatsoever because he was friends with Martin. So if they became a suspect at all, which they were interrogated, then he should have been out.
Well, I mean, he does do that type of stuff for a living, so he could have actually designed the whole thing.
Right. The chief?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because he knew that, is it Bo or Martin?
The chief he lived in that cabin before they did. He actually moved out, and then they ended up purchasing the cabin.
So it could have been another way in there that only he knew about.
Right.
Nobody would have seen him go in there.
Mm-hmm.
And if they were already, high off drugs, they weren't going to make too much noise,
Right. But the story that they get out of Justin, the son, and what he sees and witnesses, and it also, for me, gives credibility to the fact of it being them.
Yeah.
So,
but I mean, He's a younger kid, right? What was he?
Yeah, he was the oldest of the three boys. He was 12.
Yeah.
And Greg was 5, Rick was 10, and he was 12.
Hmm. So nobody's really going to pay attention to a 12-year-old, not in a
Right.
serious way,
Yeah.
especially up against the words of someone who's an officer in some way.
Right. But and when they
Uh,
talked when they originally talked to him and he tells the story about dreaming about being on a boat and seeing two men killing Sue and him trying to help comfort her. Even under hypnosis, he mentions it comforting her. He talks about seeing through the door, and he says, "Hey, maybe I wasn't dreaming. Maybe I actually saw it."
wow.
And this was under hypnosis, which unfortunately hypnosis has been ruled out as a prominent factor in a
Hmm.
case. Like you can't use hypnosis to prove somebody guilty. Um,
Right.
However, when he does go under hypnosis and he says, maybe I wasn't dreaming, I was actually there and I saw it. And he talks about actually going out there and trying to help Sue and like to kind of help with the blood.
Hmm.
I mean, these are details that a 12-year-old shouldn't really know,
Exactly.
So I think it kind of helps validate between the descriptions of Bo and Martin and the description of the sketches. I don't think that there's any way for them to point at anyone else. And the fact that Martin during the investigation was just kind of leading the his side of the story away from him,
Hmm.
it's sketchy. There's more proof, in my opinion. Okay, this is the guy.
uh, yeah. I mean, definitely they had something to do with it. If not the actual committing of the murders, but they're definitely tied to this somehow. And I don't trust. So you got a guy who's been in prison, you know, who's cool with the guy who's in law, and murder happens, and the case ends up going cold.
Right. Well, and Marilyn mentions them not coming back home till 2:30 in the morning. Now, another resident that said that they woke up around 1:15 and heard the stuff going down. I mean, this is a time frame that adds up. And
Hmm.
even Martin said that they went back to the bar.
Hmm.
As far as other people witnessed or that were there, there's not a lot of feedback as to when they left. So we don't know.
Hmm.
Yes, Cabin 28 is Keddie. We are discussing Keddie. Thank you for tuning in. We've already kind of talked about the case and we're kind of giving our ideas of what we think happened. If you are familiar with the case, um, two of the suspects is Martin Smart and his buddy Bo, and both have like PTSD issues and anger issues,
Hmm.
and they have a connection with this family in the sense that she is familiar. Nice. Um, Again, we already started to kind of wrap this up. So, but with the way that Sue was murdered, with the slash to the throat so deep that it hit the spine,
Mm.
being depantsed and having her underwear and being gagged, that's to me is in itself shows that there's somebody that is involved with the family somehow
Mhm.
and has reason for doing what they're doing. And again, Bo, we find out from Marilyn, which is Martin's wife, that Bo had a thing for Sue. Like he had mentioned her many times about how he liked her. That night before they went to the bar, they invited her to go out. She denies it. Martin, on the other hand, doesn't like John, the oldest son, and he's also got his throat slit, but his buddy Dana doesn't. He's just strangled, you know.
Mhm.
So he gets the lightest of the three murders.
I'm gonna go ahead and say that you are really accurate in how you point out the possibility of them doing, especially when you highlighted with the images that are drawn, even though they're poor sketches,
Mhm.
but they are in line with what they look like. Um,
Yeah, so these are the sketches, Ava, and then this is a picture of uh, Martin Smart and his buddy Bo. They aren't. They've only known each other for a few weeks, and they're buddy. He's living on their couch. I mean, inseparable. So if one of them decides they're going to do it, the other one's going to back him up. You know, that's just going to have it be. You got crime affiliations with Bo. You've got a retired vet that's got PTSD and anger issues, and he lost his job. His wife's leaving him. Hey, I'm going to get drunk and I want to kill somebody. Who am I going to kill?
hmm.
You know, so I mean, I just think that there's too many things that points to them. Again, I think that there's the possibility that John and Dana could have brought somebody back with them, but I don't know. You know what I'm saying? I don't think there's any, based on the intensity of the crime, and the fact that there's blood literally everywhere. I mean, they spent time killing these people,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
they were quiet about it, which means they probably knew the layout of the house, or and where they were going, what they were doing. They avoided the kids' room, so if they avoided the kids' room, maybe they knew that the kids were there. And then Tina goes missing. There are points in the investigation where they think that maybe it wasn't about any of them, and maybe it was about Tina and somebody who has or wants Tina because she is taken.
Mm.
That's the only part that I don't see with Martin and Bo that makes sense why they would take her.
Mm-hmm.
What do you got?
But it would make sense if the ex did it, right?
Right.
So that's okay. So that's where I'm at with it. I see all the points that you're making, and they definitely make sense. Um, but I just, for some reason, um, the ex to me is more um, apt to do this type of thing because of his connection and the fact that they left
Right.
and he was pissed off and
Right.
furious and anger issues the whole nine,
Mm-hmm.
and found out where they were and just lost it.
Right. Yeah. And Ava did point out, she says it's quite enough for no one to hear with little insulation. Very true. I mean, you're talking about a group of cabins in a very small area in the woods, very isolated. It's not like a trafficky area. It's a very quiet
Mhm.
little resort community. And the best there, yeah, is that someone held them. I mean, that makes sense too. I could easily see maybe they saw um John and Dana coming back, and maybe they grab John and Dana and go in there. They're holding John or Dana hostage, and Sue's like, what's going on, and just trying to be quiet to protect her kids.
Mhm.
Um, that would make sense. I mean, it is on a highway. You're right. It's on a highway, but the whole community of Keddie is very tall or very small town. I mean, the population
Mhm.
of around 100 people. There's train tracks. There's a highway. Um, and another thing that they mentioned was that, and this was a weird clue to me. So cabin 28 was initially the main hub for when trains came through. The light on cabin 28 is supposed to always be on. It has something to do with the trains.
Mhm.
When I was doing some of the research, they talk about how cabin 28 was meant to be. I don't know if it's the way that it was facing or not, but that the porch light was always supposed to be on. And they said that the night of the murder, that light was turned off.
Mm.
I was to say we looked at it as part of the Shermantine Herzog case, but they were just too young. I've been there. Oh wow.
So my next question is, Did a train pass by that day at that
Uh,
time?
well, I would imagine there could have been at some point. I've lived by train tracks, so you easily tune that sound out.
Hmm.
So if anybody in that community just didn't think about it, I mean, but I don't know. I don't know if there was one. There's nothing during the investigation that talks about a train passing by.
Okay.
Ava, I did hear that they actually completely destroyed that cabin too. Cabin 28 apparently no longer exists. Most of that community is vacant now because just vandalism and people coming by. I mean, the town wasn't really well known until these murders.
Hmm.
Um, but I think my frustration with this case is how it was handled too,
Hmm.
um, because nobody was there was no arrest made.
You know why?
Yeah, and they actually leave town. Like they talk about leaving town. I did find out, and I didn't mention this earlier because I don't know how relevant it is. But after the case, Martin and Bo move. Martin moves to like Oregon or some other state, and writes a letter to his ex-wife talking about how he sacrificed 4 lives for her and all that. You know, he writes this letter and sends it to Maryland. But if you dig into it, he had 4 children from a previous relationship, and he just cut ties with them when he got with her. So it could be that he was talking about his kids or
Mhm.
the deaths of the people in the house.
Mm.
It's really hard. Had some questionable associations back then. Yeah, and again, Bo. There's possibility that Bo was affiliated with the witness protection program in a sense. Like he got out. He got arrested for crime relations with mafia in Vegas. Then he was released and and he's moved. So I mean, it could be under different conditions. He's hiding out with Martin, and they're using him as an informant. So maybe they're trying to keep this case hush hush, so they're not pointing fingers at him, so they can
Mhm.
keep Bo out. I mean, the fact that they interviewed them together uh, is a huge spot for me because you don't do that. That you never investigate suspects together
Right.
or interrogate them.
Hmm.
But I mean, there's no other suspects. There's nothing. Again, John and Dana. Yeah, okay. So they go in town. They're a little bit of problem children, but I really think that the only person that it could have been was Martin and Bo, and that they just had the backing or the support of local enforcement. Um,
Hmm.
and it's frustrating. I mean, it is. They ended up they're both dead now, but I mean,
Yeah.
I think Martin died in like 2013, and Bo died in like 89.
Mm.
But they were both free. They never were charged with anything.
Wow. Interesting.
Uh huh.
No fingerprints, nothing like that.
Nope. But the timeline that Maryland gives you about them coming back around 2:30 in the morning and that they're burning something in the wood from the stove, that's questionable too. I mean, it just I don't know. Like I've in my little bit of research, it's them. It's them. Like I know it's them.
Yeah.
I think you might be onto something with the X. The issue that I have with that is that there's just not enough. Like they mentioned in the investigation that he did show up at one point to kind of maybe try to repair things, and it didn't work or whatever, and then he just never came back. Um, could he have had connections with them? Possible, but I mean, these are people that like Martin lived there for a long time, even prior to, unless he could, contacted him and said, "Hey, whatever." I could also see a side of the story where Sue could potentially be involved and like maybe sleeping around a bit in the community, and there
Hmm.
could have been some anger between people that are frustrated with her, and maybe I don't know, man. I really think you've got is somebody with anger issues whose wife left him and he just lost his job,
Hmm.
and they're getting drunk. I mean, it's just too many points that make sense. What's NG Lake, Ava? I'm not really sure what this is. What do you think of the case, man? I mean, this is one of those where it was never solved.
I just think there's information missing, as in all the cases that aren't solved. There's information missing, there's evidence missing, or hidden or taken away, removed, covered up. I think that the two people who should have been really investigated the most is Bo and Martin, but I also think that the ex should have been investigated a lot more too, because I don't know. I mean, when they all have the background of military, right?
Right.
And that's, to me, that's the common denominator. And to me, to meet someone and know them for a short period of time, and then they're sleeping on your couch, there had to be like a connection prior to that, like in the military when they served together. I think that's where they all met. I think they all knew each other, and I think that's the link. They were all in military, and I think somehow they made a connection, and that's what brought them together in that episode.
So, Ava, okay, all right. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate this information.
Yeah, absolutely.
She said NG and Lake are SKs operating out of that area around that time. Now, during the investigation, I did see that there were a couple well-known serial killers in the area, so it could have potentially been SK. So you've got Leonard Thomas Lake. I just looked this up. Let's see here. That's not very big, but I can't really make it any bigger. Here, let's see here. I'll turn it sideways. Well, that helps a little bit. Lake and his accomplice, Charles N.G., raped, tortured, and murdered an estimated 11 to 25 victims at a remote cabin near Woolseyville, California, 150 miles east of San Francisco. In 1985, Lake Swan. Wow, found a cabin and confirmed NG's involvement, and that's crazy. It's possible, but again, I think that the way that the crime scene was, I don't know that. I think that there was too much personal emotion involved in the way that they were killed.
You don't think so?
I do think so. I think that there's could it have been the serial killers like this? Yes. The problem that I'm having with this, I mean, maybe they saw Tina and they wanted Tina. That's a possibility.
Mm.
But I don't know, man.
But see, that's where I get confused, because there was no noise.
Right.
To me, they knew these people,
Mhm.
because otherwise it would have been screams, it would have been noise, them trying to run or fighting, trying to fight them off.
Yeah.
I think they were allowed in and welcomed in, either one way or the other, and that's why it wasn't any.
Well, and this isn't a community where they lock the doors. I mean, the killings don't. I mean, and this little community, they talk all the time about how the doors weren't locked. As a matter of fact, John's room is in the basement, which is on the back side of the cabin, and the only way upstairs is through the front door. So they were just never locked. So the person could have known that. I do kind of want to, and I think you mentioned. One of us mentioned that maybe they were held at gunpoint. John or Dana could have been held at gunpoint when they went into the house, and if you got two suspects that were there, they could have easily covered their mouths and pushed them into the house. And Sue wakes up, and they're like, "Don't say a fucking word," and then they murder them right there in the living room. But I think that whoever it was knew that there were boys in that back room. I think whoever did it knew that those boys were in the back room. they also know about these cabins. They either know the layout of the cabins or whatever. Like Ava had mentioned about the insulation being, I mean, they're shitty rundown cabins. I feel like these are houses where you could yell at your spouse to come eat dinner, and cabin three doors down could have heard it,
Yeah, absolutely.
kind of situation. So there's too much involvement with the death and the layout, and then the detail of, or the depth of the killings of John and Sue, to make it more of a personal connection, and to make them the killers. I really think that they're the ones. That's just my conclusion.
All right.
Are you still thinking that there's some sort of involvement with the ex?
Yeah, man, I can't get away from that for some reason. It just to me it just lines up like that. That it's a small town, small area. She takes the kids and goes there, and the bond with people who are in the military, especially if they were in combat, is so tight because of what they experience together. Um, if it's like a brotherhood is formed, uh, and then if even if they come across somebody, even for a small period of time in military, in passing or whatever, they had a connection. You know what I'm saying? So one person knows somebody, and that somebody knows this person, and they hear about this situation in a bar or something, and next thing you know, they're all reacting and drunk and pissed off, and things happen.
Right. I'm right there with you. I mean, I'm not going to rule it. I don't necessarily think that he's involved, but I see your side of it. For sure. And I mean, even the way that the reason that she left him was because he was physically abusive.
Yeah.
So there's definitely that same sort of kind of pattern between him and Martin, to where there could have been an involvement, even if it was indirectly. But either way, I still think it goes towards him. Yeah, and even Ava said possible. I don't think. I think it was just Martin and Bo. That's just my view. Mostly because of Marilyn's side of the story, but again, she's leaving him. He lost his job. She's breaking up with him, so her story could have been kind of altered to benefit her too. Yeah. So I mean, with all the angles, it points to the two of them. So I don't know. That's all. That's what I got for the case. That's
Okay.
what I got for the
Okay.
case tonight. I haven't looked at this case in a long time. Thanks for the refresh. Thank you. And I'm glad you tuned in. This is the Singe Eye Sockets podcast. We have a lot more on the channel. Check them out. We do these about once every other week, so I have some time to do a little bit of research. And we have like 19 other shows. I'm Jukebox Ginger. Evolution with me tonight. Evolution's got 4 shows on here as well. And we like to have a good time. This is one of those shows where we like to discuss cases where she subscribed. Thanks.
Nice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is one of those shows where I like to pick something more like a perceptive base, like where I present the evidence and I kind of mix it up to where it can kind of throw off your views on it, and we usually have other guests on as well, like Sean Shank, and I'll ask them periodically where their stance is throughout the episode, and we also like to include the commentary as well. So thank you for tuning in.
Absolutely. Nice to meet you too, Ava.
Sorry that you kind of popped in the last like 15 minutes of the show, but you gave us some insight too, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think her involvement definitely made it better than what it was. It added some more to it.
Yeah, and I could see her, the serial killer possibility, the being that they were in the area during that same time. Like she said, it didn't really fit their MO. But no, I think it was more personal than that. So
Yeah, definitely a personal attack.
mm.
A
All right.
vicious, a vicious
Yes,
personal
it
attack.
was vicious. Oh man, I mean, the crime scene was very bloody and gross.
No doubt.
You see some of the pictures. There's not a whole lot. You see a lot of blood smeared, blood stains, and markers with
Mhm.
numbers for different evidence, but that's about all you see. And I think that the way that the case was led, I think that it could have been ran a lot better than it was.
Absolutely.
So I think that there was too much of a tight knit community going on for there to be any like concrete person to go to get um, information from, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
And in a small town like that, especially after a murder, you're probably not going to have that much cooperation anyway.
right,
You know.
the stories just aren't going to line up the way that they should. I mean,
Mhm.
most of the stories were pretty similar, but again, if there's relations with any of the suspects or anything that could deter it, the most concrete like witness evidence was under hypnosis from the son of Martin. I
Right.
mean, and then the Tina. The biggest thing that throws me off is the Tina disappearing or being taken away.
Mhm.
Like, why would they have done that? She was, 14. She was 14 years old, I believe. She was at
Mm.
14 or 10. But why? There's not enough information to say why they would have taken her.
I mean, that's kind of why I keep going back to um, the actual father,
Yeah.
because that's kind of something. Even though you're dealing with PTSD and you're raging and you're doing this stuff, there's a soft side um, that wants to do right
Hmm.
and realizes, yeah, I'm tripping, I'm going way overboard, you
Hmm.
know, and then they will like take the little girl with them, you know. So
Or maybe she walked out towards the end of it. And you're right, Ava. I think today's day and age, this would have not went down the way it did. We're talking about 1981.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but that actually could bring some relevance. I could see that actually happening with the
Hmm.
dad.
Hmm.
Maybe he purchased that van. Maybe he came out there, purchased that van, and took her, or maybe Tina walked out during it, or they had just finished and they just snatched her and ran.
Hmm.
Maybe it wasn't intentional for them to take her. They probably would have just killed her right there. I don't know. I don't know. It seems like we'll never know because the
Right.
only possible suspects are dead now. So,
Yeah. Right.
all right, man. What did you
Unfortunately.
think of this? What did you think of this case tonight?
Yeah, it was great. You always come with these really interesting situations uh, because they make you think and they twist and turn and then you add more information and you add more information and
Mhm,
you add more information, and I think the way you bring it and deliver it makes it even better because what you're initially thinking has to change and alter
mhm,
because you add more, you give more
mhm.
of what's going on. So but even though you did that, I'm kind of still where I was. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
Uh, but I definitely see what you mean, and I follow you totally because yeah, they definitely had something to do with it, and they also had something to do with the cover up as well.
Mhm,
Uh, but I think with everything that you presented and how it was presented and how everything resolved, I guess uh, I just think it's a passion kill of rage from somebody who was literally pissed off because she left with the kids, right? I just to me that's what it kind of leads
Well,
to.
And with that being the outcome of your conclusion,
Mm-hmm.
Sheila, Rick, and Greg were turned back over to custody with their dad. That's exactly what happened. And, fortunately, they are actually doing okay. But I thought that was pretty interesting based on your resolution of the case.
Oh man,
They did end up going back and living with their dad, and they ended up turning out all right.
you saw what I did to your mother and your older brother. Do you want me to do that to you too? You come with me. You come with me right now. That's messed up.
I thought that's a pretty funny way to end it, based off of your conclusion. But yeah,
that was great.
All right. Well, with that being said, I want to wrap this episode up. Again, Ava, shout out to you for hanging out with us tonight, for the information you gave us.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I like to do these like once every 2 weeks, so stay tuned. Follow JG's Lounge on all socials so you can get updates whenever we're doing this stuff. Yeah, well, until next time, everybody, we're going to see you around.
Take care.